to introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're from. And as always, please make a point of checking out all of our social media and subscribe to every single channel that we have. And I'm going to just go ahead and start off with my introduction of our guest today. So, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at Secular AZ today. It is February 2nd. Somehow, simultaneously, January was the longest month on record, and also now I am so confused as to how it's already February. But here we are, it's February. So again, if you are joining us on the webinar, feel free to put your name in the chat. If you're on Facebook, give us a shout out. As you all know, white Christian nationalism is the greatest threat to our democracy, and we, Secular AZ, is your voice for the separation of religion and government. We're a nonprofit organization, and we act as your voice to elected officials all across the state and at every level. So be sure to make sure that you check out all of our social media channels, like, subscribe, share. We have great programming. Like today, I'll get to it in just a minute. We have these Friday updates that, and the topics are from, journalists, historians, authors, even just people on the ground who are dealing with the policies and laws that are coming from the evangelical extremists in this country. So be sure to, set yourself up so you don't miss a single Friday episode. Next Friday, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Barbara Atwood. She is a Mary Ann Ritchie Professor of Law Emerita and a co-director of the Family and Juvenile Law Certificate Program at the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law. So be sure to join us because she's going to be talking about the Arizona abortion ban case and the mifepristone case. So really good stuff. But today I'm super excited. Today we are joined by Matthew Boedy. Matthew is a professor of rhetoric at the University of North Georgia. He's been writing about Charlie Kirk, our favorite, not, and Turning Point USA since 2018. He is the author of Speaking of Evil, Rhetoric, and the Responsibility to and for Language, and May 1970. Okay, I hope I had all that right. I just was reading what was handed off to me, so go ahead. If I missed anything, Dr. Boedy, from your really substantial resume, please fill in the blanks.
No, I will. I will say thanks for plugging my book on evil. It has nothing to do with Charlie Kirk, but it's still a good book. It's an academic look at the rhetoric of evil. So if you live in Arizona, I don't need to tell you who Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA are. What I want to do today is talk about how their national plans and international plans are a threat to democracy and to America and to other nations, I guess. And then lay out what that plan is in great detail. I will say that I have a book proposal out to several publishers about Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, and we'll get into some of that. For those who don't know, I'm a professor of rhetoric, which means I study people's words and communications. I teach in the English department here at North Georgia. I've written several things, both academic and public, about Charlie and Turning Point. Been to several of their events. They've come to Georgia. They've been on my campus, recruiting and things like that. But I got my start with Turning Point back in 2016, 17, when they were virtually unknown. And if you remember, one of the first big things they did was the professor Watchlist, which was naming a bunch of professors they didn't like. The first 100, I was on that first list, and I didn't know who they were. I don't think many people did. And I got on the list for merely writing an op-ed about a bill in our state house that became law that allowed concealed guns on campus. I was against that bill that became law. And I had written that for a different publication. Campus Reform, another right-wing conservative group, had written about it. And then when Turning Point USA did their aggregate list of all the things they didn't like, they put me on their list. And to be honest with you, because I didn't know anything about them, I ignored that. I mean, some people called me like, you're on this list. But really, of course, after 2016, they took off, mainly because of Trump and their association with that. And so I just started a blog 2018 on Medium. I'm going to post a link to it in the chat. And really, I started out fact checking Charlie Kirk because I have a journalism background. I have a journalism degree from the University of Florida. And that's the kind of things that I write. I haven't posted in probably about 6 months because I've been working on this book proposal. But that's the thing I started doing, was just trying to write things about Charlie Kirk and posting them to Twitter and doing that. it was a very small audience to begin with, and then I got a couple of spikes in views, and other people noticed I got on some podcasts, and it's built really into what we in higher education would say is a research agenda. I do say that a lot of stuff that I do now is Turning Point, where that book Upon Evil and other things before that were not at all associated with that. So it's really turned into a research agenda and given me lots of things to do and talk to you people in Arizona. I've talked to several people in Arizona. I've talked to media in Arizona. I've talked to pastors in Arizona. So obviously Arizona is front and central for Turning Point USA. If you don't recall, in the last few months, really in the last year, Turning Point has had some issues, to use an understated word, with some of their sponsors for some of their events. They had the annual event that used to be in Florida, the America Fest. Before that, it was a Student Action Summit. They moved them to Arizona, I think, and now they have the America Fest, which is sort of their main one, and the Student Action Summit is less. And that's really, if you don't follow it as closely as I do, Turning Point USA is not a college organization or even a high school organization anymore. I clarify it, or I call it a media empire because of the different things that it is. And so,
And you know
yeah,
what? I would say here in Arizona, it's the de facto
Republican
GOP
Party, yes,
at
totally,
this
yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yes, right. Especially in Arizona with the people they've had and the ties they've had to the fake electors there. So I say media empire. That means there's a media arm, and they do a lot of obviously content creation and social media. But behind the scenes, things we can't really see in public is what they're doing, and it's hard to follow that unless they come out and announce it, and you start to see trends. Anyway, so back to the sponsors. I wrote a Twitter thread one time about a sponsor they had for their one of their conference events that was a registered sex offender, and Rolling Stone picked it up. This guy had a business that was new as one of these MAGA related merchandise business, and he paid the sponsorship fee to a Turning Point USA conference, which is pretty hefty to get his business out there. And he also happened to be a registered sex offender in one of the Dakotas. I can't remember. I posted the Rolling Stone article. Turning Point actually responded to that. It's very rare for them to respond to things like that. And Charlie tweeted about, we were unaware of this, but he's forgiven in Christ and he's changed his life. And as I pointed out, I'm perfectly okay with that. I will totally admit to a secular AZ audience, I am a Christian. At the same time, that wasn't the point of this, that you are a family values morality organization and this is who you hire. I'm all for forgiveness and all for people selling any product they want, but you didn't do the background checks that you should have been doing. And that I don't think that business has showed up in the next conference. They also had a sponsor of one of their events that looks very, very similar to someone arrested for cocaine dealing. And I want to point that out that I went through the Twitter feed that I just posted and pointed out the very similarities. I can't say it's 100% sure, and I don't want to get into trouble that, but it looks very similar to a guy that runs a merchandise business. Again, that was a sponsor or had a link to one of the conferences that Turning Point USA put on. And I just want to point those out because as the more Turning Point grows and the bigger it becomes, these people will gravitate toward it. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you're on mute, Ginny.
That was just my way of showing you that I agree.
Okay. All right, sure.
I
Anyway,
agree.
so it is quite fascinating from my perspective to watch Turning Point that nobody knew in 2015 and 2016, and Charlie was just going around the nation attending these events and speaking, to now it is quite the opposite. It is the center of gravity that everyone goes to. He doesn't have the biggest radio audience or podcast audience, but in several states like Arizona and other things, especially in the evangelical world, they are the center of gravity now. And so these people will attach themselves to it, and they have these ambassadors that have gotten in trouble recently, and they have lots of different links. And so it's an empire, not just a media empire, but an empire among many different things. So in terms of national work. Turning Point USA obviously started Turning Point Action, which is their more political arm, and they're doing a ballot chasing operation, whatever that is. They're hiring loads of people to be ballot chasers and managers of ballot chasers in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, I think is the third state. And from my understanding, based upon the job descriptions that they're hiring, is that they have this amazing amount of data that they previewed in Las Vegas a couple of days ago, where on the precinct level they're trying to find unlikely voters or people who have not voted yet, and to fill out a mail-in ballot, which of course they have disparaged for several years now, but now are getting into the game because they lost. Um, and so I want to say that's just one thing that they're doing. Turning Point Action is doing that. Turning Point itself, of course, has still the college groups and high school groups, and they're spreading out all across the nation. I think they announced a couple months ago they have more high school groups now than college groups, which again goes back to my point that they are no longer a college group. Don't think of them as that. Um, they also have, yes, ma'am.
So can I, okay, so speaking of high school and college groups, there was just a thing, a piece on NPR the other day talking, and it may have been on The World actually. I think it was the international
Oh,
news
Marco
program.
Werleman, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was about the political the ideological divide between the between men and women, young men and women
Yes.
in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and how more and more young men like the
Yes.
bar graph,
Right.
the graph is
Yeah.
going opposite directions. The
Right. Right.
women are
Yeah.
identifying because of course, our reproductive rights are under attack and all that kind of stuff. So I just wonder, I guess my question is, do you do any analysis of the gender divide in
Mm.
the number of young people? I'm sorry, that's probably too far in the weeds, but it's
No,
just
I
fresh on
mean,
my mind.
I think that um, for Turning Point, the divide is real because of several issues, and you mentioned one of them. And so they have several shows that they're doing, like Pop Politics with Alex Clark, and hiring females like that to spread female message. Obviously, Candace Owens also plays a role in that, even though she's not officially with them anymore. And so the divide is noticeable to them because they now have energy and money directed toward that, right? So they have the Young Women Leadership Conference. I think it's now it's an annual thing. Kirk's wife spoke at it. Different people, different women spoke at it. Um, and they also then have a parallel men's, I'll call it a ministry, called the Summit, which is these weekend events where men go and do military style drills and tactics and sit by the fire and do a lot of different, much like a men's group at a church. And so I think they have noticed that divide. In terms of college students and both genders of college students, I wrote on the blog probably 3 or 4 months ago about how in the last 5 years, Charlie and Turning Point have not moved the needle in terms of that 18 to 24-year-old dial. And he wrote an op-ed for Newsweek, and I kind of picked it apart to show he's really, you know, you know saying things that aren't accurate. That is, that he divided the number of people who were heavy Republican, moderate Republican, middle, and yes, the young group, the 18 to 24-year-old, is becoming less liberal, but it's not becoming more conservative. And there was a story out today, I think, about that. Is obviously very young people are not happy with Joe Biden, but they're not also then going to go vote for Trump. They might stay home, but at the same time, they're not. Charlie's not moving the needle in the prime demographic of white college students that he has been after for the last 5 years. So he has raised a lot of money on the fight, on the we're so far behind, and there's indoctrination centers on college campuses, but that money really hasn't moved the needle in terms of electoral politics. In terms of the gender divide, I do think, of course, he understands all that, and understands that the white women, particularly white suburban women, young women, are going to be on the side of the Democrats, and that's why he's focusing on 3 states in which to turn that. But I don't personally look at that type of data. There are very few. I mean, there are a lot of people that do. Sociologists, Andrew Perry being one of them. Sorry, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry being one of them. But yeah, I do write about how Turning Point views those divides. So that is part of the movement that they're doing is looking at particularly demographics. They used to have these um, minority groups. Again, they had Blexit, but they used to have a Hispanic group. I think they still have a Jewish group. I don't think those are as advertised as they used to be, but they were doing that. And now, again, with Charlie moving toward more, racist, white, anti-racism, things like that, or the Christian nationalists and the white nationalists, that is less apparent. Though he obviously has people who are minorities who support him, who work for him. He has also, of course, moved away from supporting gay marriage and things like that, and Rob Smith being the key employee who is gay and left the organization, similarly under good circumstances, but nonetheless. Um, and I say all that to suggest that his national efforts, Charlie Kirk's national efforts, are being focused in battleground states, but at the same time, he had expanded this Freedom Square freedom thing that started at Dream City Church into multiple churches around the nation. And this is the Turning Point Faith angle. Um, they've had 3 pastor summits now, one on each coast, and then one again in San Diego. And of course, the number of pastors who go to that keeps rising. And most importantly, of course, they're forming links and partnerships with big evangelical groups like the Southern Baptist Convention. Ronnie Floyd, former president of the SBC, spoke at the pastor summit. So it is not just the charismatic and the Pentecostal or people associated with Rob McCoy, that sort of lineage. It is more, we'll say, I don't want to say Pentecostals aren't mainstream, but a different type of more powerful evangelical group than they had before. And so there's Turning Point Faith. There's the college and high school thing. There's the gender thing. And then, of course, finally, there's Turning Point Academy, which you're very familiar with because the first school that he is starting with is Dream City Church. Um, and I think that hasn't gotten off the ground as much as perhaps he'd like. They're still forming partnerships, and the guy that is running it is a well-known person in private Christian schools, Hertz Herdberger. And so that will take off. Whether or not he actually starts brick and mortar schools or keeps partnering with schools. What I think is happening, and I can't be sure, is I think Charlie and Turning Point is following the Hillsdale College model, which is let's give out curriculum for free, form partnership with schools, and then move into more public school arena, like the state of Tennessee has a partnership with Hillsdale and those things. Um,
So I have to tell you, Dr. Boedy, that just yesterday or Wednesday, I can't remember, our deeply unserious superintendent of public instruction, Tom Horn, announced a partnership with PragerU
yep.
and even had a bizarre ribbon cutting ceremony for a virtual curriculum platform.
Okay.
And, of course, managed to beat the drums because there were a shocking number of people there who showed up. So they're very much into like this whole. And first of all, they called PragerU because it's a nonprofit, it's a charity.
Mm-hmm.
In case y'all didn't know, so that means Turning Point USA is also a charity. So are we. Whatever. None of that is true. And their CEO makes I think $800,000 a year.
Well, Dennis Prager
So,
is a mentor to Charlie Kirk, so just make sure that that's clear.
oh yeah, no, he's
Yeah.
actually testified at our Capitol.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I did want to address Kathy's question here. Big picture, I've met several people who don't follow politics and are not familiar with Charlie Kirk, and they say they've never heard of it. How can I explain it briefly? I would say that Turning Point is the most powerful culture war group on conservative MAGA side. There's probably several groups that one might name if you watch Fox News long enough, but they are the most powerful because of their youth element. And now I don't know, their Turning Point itself is $100 million organization. Turning Point Action probably is another 100 million, and then you have links down the line. So I would say that Turning Point used to describe itself as a free market freedom group. I would say it's a culture war machine invested in MAGA politics, and Charlie Kirk is the face of it. You might not know Turning Point, but you might know Charlie Kirk. Other people might know the opposite. But it has several things that it does, but it's not just a college group, and that's mainly what it gets called on regular mainstream media. So I hope that answers Kathy's question there. So before we get into it further in the time, I wanted to mention the international efforts of Turning Point. I wrote an article back in 2023 about their international efforts, and I want to post that in case you missed it. So the first international effort that Charlie did was Turning Point Canada, and that pretty much died very quickly. The people that are involved in it didn't do much. There was not a lot of marketing of salesmen. There was a Turning Point Canada at some point. I did an interview with the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, in 2018 about it. After that, it pretty much died. The though now there are two significant turning point outposts, beachheads, I've called them, in United Kingdom, England, and Australia. And they're both described in this article. Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens went over to kick off Turning Point UK. When was that? 2019. Did a big event, got some donors. Candace is now married to one of the people that founded Turning Point UK. It's moved around in terms of leadership several times, but it has a stable leadership now in two people. One is a member of parliament, and I can't pronounce his name. It's Marco something, but I really want to remember the other guy's name, which is the chief operating officer, is Nick Tenconi, Tenconi. He's a personal trainer. And I'm not knocking personal trainers. I'm saying he has no experience in community organizing or politics that we knew of before this. And they're doing similar things to what Turning Point USA is doing. They're on college campuses. They're against immigration. They're against big government. But the thing that has kept them on the map is they did a series of protests. I'll make sure I say this correctly. At a pub, I think it was a pub or a library. The article makes it clear that said it was going to host drag reading hour, but never actually did. And Turning Point USA, Turning Point UK kept protesting the location every few weeks to draw up attention. Eventually, they stopped. This was over last summer. And so since then, really, they've had nowhere else to go. You go to their website, there's some links that are broken. They claim to have all these chapters, or started out with all these chapters on college campuses. They're not really listed anymore. They do a couple of events where they go into campus and, much like, change my mind kind of thing, or interview people on the street and things like that. But they haven't had a lot of events or a lot of media. Sometimes they just post Charlie Kirk videos on their social media. I wouldn't say it's dead, but it's struggling. Even more struggling is their Turning Point Australia outfit. Now, to try to jumpstart that, Charlie got Don Trump Jr. to agree to go to Australia to do a series of lecture talking events over last summer. And it was going to be sponsored by Turning Point Australia and another group. But at the last minute, they had some visa problems. There's some debate on why they had those problems, but he was not able to go. They rescheduled. That didn't work out either. And that, I think the rescheduled date was November, and that didn't work out either. And really, since then, there's been zero posting, zero events, zero anything from the one person that runs Turning Point Australia. His name is Joel Jamal. He's your basic Australian Charlie Kirk. And so I'm not sure if I would officially say it's dead, but at the same time, he doesn't have anything. And I emailed a reporter down there in Australia for Cricky News, and he looked into it and asked him, and basically says, yeah, we're a lot of people signed up for those Don Trump Jr. events and very upset they didn't get their money back. Turning Point wasn't in charge of the money, but he said maybe we'll have some more announcements in February. So I do think Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA are very much interested in international efforts and very much interested in having succeed, but there's not much he can do in America other than go there, and he hasn't done that yet. He tried to send Don Jr. there. So I don't know if those two beachheads will survive, but that's what they're doing in those two places. Turning Point UK, drag story hour, anti-immigration, big government. In Australia, there's similar issues at play, but it's really about immigration and government. So the last thing I want to, yeah.
Oh, real quick. So just because I promised that I wouldn't let it get too far into the chat, but somebody asked early on in the chat if the needle has been moved to the right,
Yes.
you know, to the turning point direction with regards to BIPOC groups, Black, Indigenous, people of color? And if so, which ones?
Hmm. Hmm. I don't know if I would say that it's moved. I do think that, of course, Joe Biden needs a large amount of a black population. That's the thing that got him to be a candidate, 80 something percent, and it's falling off now. Turning Point is interested in shaving off some of those points, interested in making people question Biden's age and things like that. And I point that out because they're not necessarily getting them to vote for Trump. They're just getting them to stay home. So these outfits that Turning Point has done, and of course he attacked Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day holiday. So I don't know how many black people he's going to get to vote for him when he does that. But he had his Pierre Howard, the leader of Brexit, on there to explain that scenario. And some conservative black people attacked him for that, or criticized. I don't say attacked, but rightly criticized him for that. So I think they're interested in shaving off points, getting people to stay home, especially in Wisconsin, which could turn that state. But I don't think the needle's moving that way. Now with Hispanics, yes, that is the case. There are Hispanic movements toward Trump, um, and that had shown up in 16 and in 20, that growing base. But at the same time, Turning Point isn't really doing anything with that market. Now, there's the immigration rhetoric, of course, and that does meet with a certain segment of Hispanics, but there isn't as much going on. So, what is going on? I think, again, Charlie Kirk is doing what Trump has did in 2016 is find white people who haven't voted and digging that well deeper to bring that number up from 85 to 95%. And that will turn Arizona and Georgia, probably Wisconsin as well. So they're interested in shaving off points. They're not necessarily interested in converting them. I don't know if they could. So in the time that I have left, I wanted to mention what I think is Charlie Kirk's future and plan. Um, so when Charlie Kirk went to I think it was CPAC in 2021 or 2020, he said that Donald Trump was the first president that understood the seven mountains of cultural influence, or seven areas of cultural influence. And if you're not familiar with that, I would describe it as a particular understanding of Christian nationalism. And they are seven areas of culture, seven areas of cultural influence: media, family, schools, government, businesses, or the economy. And I forget there's one more. And that um, way of understanding Christianism is probably 30, 35 years old. One of Charlie's, partners now, Lance Wallno, is a kind of the known person of that, but he didn't invent it. He probably has added the word mountains to it. But that seven ideas of cultural influence goes back to the 70s with campus organizations like Campus Crusade and Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham, which started Youth with a Mission. Um, and so that idea that these are seven areas that we need to influence has been around for a while. But what Charlie's doing is putting that on steroids. He's not just interested in influencing those areas, he's interested in taking over those areas. And I don't mean by mass influence then, I mean taking over those areas in terms of perhaps electing people to change rules and policies in that area. So you think government is the first mountain? That could be the case, but he has all these other arms that he's doing, right? So yes, Speaker Mike Johnson is connected to that, which is why electing him to the House speakership is a powerful move for that. And the reason I bring this up is this is the centerpiece of the book that I'm working on. Is I'm suggesting that Charlie Kirk is the heir to the Seven Mountains Mandate, and he is the person that could make it successful with things that he's doing and being young and all those things. It is at the precipice of being successful. Now, you could say, well, it'll be not successful if Biden wins. That's not necessarily true. I think that if Biden wins, it will become Seven Mountains will become the plan to keep Charlie Kirk in business, right? This is why he did Turning Point Faith, and this is why he does some other things. Rob McCoy is a big Seven Mountains person, if you didn't know that. So that is the plan. Now, underneath these seven mountains and what they're specifically doing, right? We mentioned Turning Point Academy, we mentioned Turning Point Faith, we mentioned the gender wars, we mentioned, Charlie's say don't go to college and get married young and have babies. There's other aspects to these seven mountains, and there's rhetoric built behind it, and there's not necessarily a step-by-step plan, but these are the seven areas in which he is going to build a turning point on. So there's Turning Point Media. They have all these shows, right? That's just one of the seven mountains, and I want to point that out. That's what I think is the future. Many people ask me, do you think that Charlie Kirk's going to run for office? No, I don't. I don't think. I think maybe in the early times, maybe he thought about that. I think he wanted to be the next Rush Limbaugh, and he certainly has become part of that. Now, it's sort of an unwritten book, pages. It's all new. There's no playbook other than to repeat what's ever everybody has done. So become the next Rush Limbaugh. That kind of worked out already. So why is he attacking the RNC? Because his group sees an opportunity for business there, right? The RNC is having to be, yes, pro-Trump, but they also can't choose sides. And the reason that he's doing all the stuff now is because the RNC can't get involved until there's one candidate, just for example. So he sees a business opportunity there. He could become a kingmaker. That is, Turning Point becomes so involved in multiple areas that it becomes the Republican National Committee, not just in Arizona. So does he want to be the head of the RNC? No, he's even bigger than that. He would put someone there, right? So you think about what he's doing, it's kind of, he has had really great advisors and people to think long term. I know he's connected to Trump and been on the Trump train, even though he wasn't for him in the beginning, but he has built the organization to last, sustain itself post Trump losing here in several months, which we hope. So he is both tied to Trump, but also has built the organization beyond that. And I think that the Seven Mountains plan is that not just fundraising, marketing thing. I do think he actually believes it. So it is a grift in terms of raising money, but it is also, I think that he believes it. I mean, he calls himself a Christian, evangelical Christian, so he has that background as well. But at the same time, I think that he has, over the years, done a really good job of finding themes, if you will, or topics that will last. Yes, he is a daily fear monger and different things on his podcast, but over time, you see things he's chosen to do that have gone beyond Trump or gone beyond MAGA or see it beyond that. And that's really what I want to point out about the Seven Mountains. So, where does Turning Point USA go short term and long term? Obviously, they're interested in winning the election for Donald Trump. So if that happens, my God, I don't know what would become. Charlie Kirk has mentioned Civil War several times. That could be both winning and losing here. Let's be honest. I think that would Charlie take a position in the Trump nomination? Why would he? I mean, he is the whisperer, and he can do whatever he wants. He has no political background. Not that it matters, but no government background. I think that he will continue to find places where his message resonates. Obviously, in Turning Point, faith and church is there, but also the deeper he goes into this white nationalism, the more he finds readable or audiences that are ready to hear that. And there is a large audience for that. I think you guys know that. And so I think that it's hard to know where he's going. There are mega donors and there are small donors. There are people who show up to these conferences who are not 18. I mean, it's become much like a Trump rally in these conferences. There's not just great speakers, as they say, but there's also this training. So I think that if and when, hopefully, Trump loses in a few months, Turning Point replaces that. And so what that looks like is, we kind of mentioned already, but at the same time, needs to be an outlet, and I think everybody kind of sees that, for where these people, that is MAGA people, are going to go, right? And so Turning Point is becoming older. Charlie Kirk is getting older. He's married, has a child now, and so he personally has to, get away from the college group. He'll still be very popular at that, but he is building an organization as he grows, and with his age. And I think that he's still seen as a young person within the churches, but at the same time, as he gets older, he is building an organization that will outlast him. That is, it's bigger than him.
And I was just gonna say, gosh, I have such a terrible lag here. I've tried to close everything just in case it's on my end or whatever. So I apologize in advance if this is laggy, because it is for me. But one trait that he has, something that we should all get better at, is he's very nimble, right?
Yes.
Like he is really able to adjust. And what I wrote down is that He would never get involved with party politics because uh, from his position, from his pedestal, really, because that's what he's sitting on.
Yeah.
He's the game maker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's the dungeon master here. He's the one that gets to decide which person in a potential political position of power is worthy at this point. And so he can pivot very quickly and find speakers to adjust
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
whatever his message du jour is today.
Right. The original question from Kathy, like nobody's ever heard of Turning Point. I think the best way to describe it is all the other groups that are doing MAGA or conservative stuff, Alliance Defending Freedom being one of them, these family outfits, they're only doing one of the seven mountains. Charlie is doing all seven. So you may not have heard of them, but they're doing several things that other groups are doing, but they're doing things that groups are not doing. And I think that that's the key to understanding is they're doing multiple things, and so that makes them very powerful. And so that made them dilute their area in one particular thing. But I don't know what comes next and per se the next step is, but he is building an organization to last.
So the other thing that came up just now or during your discussion, and you're obviously well aware that Charlie Kirk is in our backyard. You referenced Dream City Church. There was recently a teacher, apparently not with Turning Point Academy, but with another private school. As you know,
Yeah.
Arizona has opened up its coffers carte blanche to anybody who wants to put their kid in a private school, and I have to fund it with my tax dollars, or a micro school where there's absolutely no accountability whatsoever. But there was a teacher just recently who was, arrested on charges of, child sexual abuse. And then, what's his name? Number 45. He was supposed to be here for
Right. It's canceled.
a
Yeah.
whole rally and it got canceled. And as you know too, Kari Lake blew up the
Oh yeah.
entire GOP. Okay, so a little bit
Yeah.
my I'm not a conspiracy theorist. However, I wonder how much of this was maybe even I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the cognitive dissonance that people have when they're saying our private schools don't need any accountability. How dare you, Katie Hobbs, ask for any kind of accountability? And then that very same week that Governor Hobbs announces her plan for accountability, a private school employee is found to be, inappropriate with students.
Well, let me say I'm a former high school teacher, so to be honest with you, that kind of thing happens at all different types of schools to people who have no records beforehand. So it's kind of hard to judge background checks, but you should do background checks. Particularly though at private Christian schools, not so much the lack of government accountability, but the infusion of authority in the teacher figure there is really key. I mean, we have more than a few examples of youth ministers doing the same thing, and of course, older ministers in the church doing the same thing. So there's a connection there to the type of religion that Charlie follows. And I do want to bring it back to the things that he talks about in terms of gender, but also marriage and family, and that type of thing, that type of authoritarianism within religion helps people like that teacher do things that they do. So we can do background checks all day, and we can interview people better. But at the same time, there is a theology there that one can't stop, which is why you shouldn't give public money to these private schools. We're having the same discussion here in Georgia, and of course, charter schools and getting vouchers. The evidence is totally against them. It doesn't work. It doesn't help students succeed. Um, but in terms of the politics of that, right? I think it was the Kari Lake revelation of the audio that canceled that event, and Trump didn't want anywhere near that. He didn't want the division within the group, and he didn't want to be there when that division was obviously at its peak. He will, as he said, come back to Arizona, I'm sure, several times before the end of the election, specifically at Dream City Church. But I came to describe it as infighting among the GOP. It in Arizona, of course, it will be to their detriment. There will people who are, if you will, old school McCain conservatives who will stay home and not vote for Kari Lake, who will obviously be the GOP candidate there for Senate. Um, and that could cost Trump. I think he knows that. And so I think he's interested in using Charlie Kirk, an organization in Arizona that doesn't have, I would say, have the baggage of Kari Lake, but obviously they're connected at the hip. So, but there's just a different look at him than there is her. They show up at the same events, obviously. And I will be interested to see, obviously Charlie's been Kari Lake events and they've been really tight. How closely he will be with her in the fall. I'm sure he will, but is it less than the last time? Is it more? Will he? I mean, to be honest with you, I've checked federal election records. Right, Charlie Kirk has only donated himself to one political candidate in his life, and so I find that strange that he doesn't want to donate to people, but Turning Point Action obviously will.
Yeah, may I ask who? So was it Donald Trump? Is that the only
No,
person he's
no,
ever?
no. It was a congressional candidate. What was his name? It might have been Matt Gaetz. I can't remember. But it was a congressional candidate in 2018, and it was the $2,000 or whatever it was. But he hasn't done it since that I can find, and which is fascinating because he again talks about all these things that he does. But then again, he lives in that great house now.
Oh yeah. Well, Matt Gates would totally track
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with Charlie
It might be
Kirk.
him. It is a congressman. I can't remember what it is, but um, yeah.
Hmm. Okay, let me just go back. I don't think I see any question.
Somebody
Oh,
else.
is
Yeah.
there's one from New Mexico Skies. Is Paula White still Trump's spiritual advisor, or has he moved on to someone crazier?
We haven't heard her name for a while. She's probably in the background. We have a local mega pastor here in Gainesville named Jensen Franklin, who was at a Charlie Kirk event. Was it last week or there's one coming up? I can't remember. Charismatic theology, Pentecostal. He was on Trump's spiritual advisor committee. I think that yeah, Trump does move back and forth between these people, particularly as he uses them for their political ends. I don't know if she is particularly. I'm sure she hasn't gone away. At the same time, he will bring that group back out, that evangelical advisory board, or whatever he wants to call it this time. And certainly, I'm sure that Jensen Franklin and Rob McCoy and other people will be on it that will show up at an event. I'm sure sometime here soon, but I don't know if she personally is still the advisor. Um, he, what was it? He hasn't really talked about Christianity that much yet, but I'm sure that he will get back to it.
I'm sure. Let's see. And I put it out there, the friendly atheist, Hement Meta is a great Substack guy who he writes frequently about hate preachers. So we have one here in Tempe. His name is Greg Locke, and he's absolutely horrible. So,
Yeah, right.
I'm sure that he's probably highlighted the hate preacher in Georgia that you referenced as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
here's an interesting one. There's as you may know, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, Sheriff Joe, who achieved, national notoriety for things like green baloney and pink underwear and hateful policies and discrimination and lawsuits for us taxpayers. He's now running at age 91 or 92 for mayor again in Fountain Hills, which is a very, I would say, affluent
okay.
neighborhood, but also really passionate. I went to an event there recently, but this one comes from Cindy, and Cindy asks, or she says, Fountain Hill's youngest town council member, Hannah Toth, Toth, a MAGA believer, has just been hired by Charlie Kirk. She's greater. Oh, it's not a question. She's
Yeah,
being groomed for greater things.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that
Hmm.
doesn't surprise me at all.
No, no, yeah, not at all. Especially in that ballot chasing operation that he has. They have a lot of data. They presented that data in Las Vegas about all these people that unlikely voters. And of course, the thing about unlikely voters is they're unlikely for a reason, right? It's very difficult to go find them and to get them to vote. But yeah, I'm sure that Charlie's hiring lots of people, especially in Arizona, to do things and to share in his operation there. I know that one of the things that I saw with Turning Point Faith was their initial job postings, and so they have what is called they have these Turning Point Faith representatives in churches, and so these people are hired to make relationships with pastors and congregants in their city. I forget what their title is. It might be church coordinator, but I forget. But But they're made to make partnerships to speak at churches and or to have their tables out in the foyer, things like that. And they're in all the major cities that you can think of, not just in the South. And so keeping that going, takes a lot of money. And I think that the Turning Point Faith people and the Turning Point Action people and the Turning Point USA people, he's hiring a lot. Now, whether it stays on after 2024 is what I'm saying, is that there will be a group that the money gravitates toward after Trump loses. And I'm saying that Charlie is hoping that it's TPUSA.
Aye, aye, aye. I mean, you can't deny that the man's a visionary, right?
Yeah, I really think again the what is his name, Bill Montgomery. I really think that that was a powerful influence on Charlie. He died from COVID in 2020. The stories that Charlie told about Bill at the funeral were amazing. I mean that Bill saw him at one of these events in Illinois speaking, and there's a video of it you can see on the Turning Point website, and really was impressed and just took him under his wing and took him to all these events and got him to speaking gigs. Like he would walk up to people and say, "Hey, I got this really great kid here. Can you give him a few minutes?" And that blossomed into going down to the RNC in Tampa. And there's a really funny story about like Charlie and Bill had no idea, what to do. They just sat in the hotel lobby watching people trying to talk with him. And then they realized maybe we try to, they didn't have tickets or the badges to get into the convention. And so Charlie talks to a person, random stranger walking out of the convention, asks for his credentials to go in, and he gets on Fox News on the floor, and then meets Foster Price in a hallway. So Bill Montgomery was really the person that got them to go down there. And funny story again, he said they got a hotel like an hour and a half away from Tampa because they didn't know where it was. And that Bill was hiding some of his medical issues there and didn't want Charlie to know and wanted to keep it going. And the last thing I'll say about that relationship is, as I think Charlie said at the funeral, like, so his initial Fox News appearance in April 2012, and that got him to the RNC in Tampa that summer. But by December, they were broke. After even getting that Foster Price money, still they had to go find more people. So it really wasn't a big thing from the beginning, and I want people to know that yes, Charlie is good at what he does, and he's had very good advisors to think long term, to think about the strategic things that he does. You may disagree with him vehemently, and I do, but he is good at what he does.
Well, and so there's a couple of things that I think of. First of all, we also have a Bill Montgomery here on our Arizona Supreme Court. So for a hot second, it was super confusing because we were like, oh, yeah, he got Bill Montgomery, but different Bill. I put it in the chat in case anybody's interested.
Right.
The other thing, though, I think about is that, okay, so I mentioned in a meeting with our accountants, like just talking about our C3 status. We also have a
Mm-hmm.
C4 that's really, for the most part, inactive these days. And talking about how frustrating it is for me as a C3 executive director and trying to make sure we're always on the up and up, that there's never any, notion that we're being partisan in any way.
Right.
Meanwhile, here's Charlie Kirk. And basically our accountant said, because the IRS is so overwhelmed, you would need a full-time person to call and just say, hey, I want to report. So this is really for anybody who's listening right now. If you are interested in a volunteer gig where all you do is call the IRS and
Mm-hmm.
report, you know, groups, churches, C3s who are pushing a political agenda, specifically with candidates getting elected, I would be more than happy to connect you with an organization that would be happy to have you do that kind of work. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, at the end of the day, what our accountant said is that these people are so
Right. Yeah.
overwhelmed.
Yeah. They're
And every
swamped.
time that our legal team files a complaint, it's like, yeah, sorry. Like it's just like this form letter that we get all the time, and it's very frustrating. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like how these C3s, and just yesterday PragerU is has been called a charity by our superintendent of public instruction. Like how can we combat this as like regular citizens, or how do we sleep at night, for crying out loud?
Um, I think two things. One, I did a study actually of sermons given after the election in 2016 to look at this very question. some of them I looked at it before, so did they endorse or not? And very, very few pastors come out of and endorse a specific candidate. I think of the 30 that I looked at, one did, and that was Jim Garlow out in California. The other ones were obviously, especially on the conservative side, very much mentioning issues and implying that there was only one candidate to vote for. But I say that because those are obviously 501c3 organizations as churches, and they are very much aware where the line is, not just legally, but with their congregation. And so what
Mhm.
Charlie has done now is called those people cowards. Pastors and preachers who don't endorse MAGA, endorse the things that he wants, and endorse Trump are being called cowards. And I think that I know you're a secular organization, but at the same time, you, as a Christian, I just find that revolting. And so it's important to be able to sleep at night. I use medication, so I don't know if you do, but at the same time, we have to support people who are against that. That's certainly Biden and Democrats, independents, things like that. But we also have to give applause to groups like the Bulwark or other groups like that stand up for this. And so don't you have to work with people you don't agree with several times. That's what democracy is. So if we're interested in saving democracy, it has to be a pluralistic attempt at it. It can't just be we win and you lose, even though obviously that happens on election day. So that's the last thing I want to say in terms of, I run a 501c7, I think it is, the American Association of University Professors here in Georgia. So I'm very aware of those things. And you think professors liberal indoctrination? Not at all. We are quite broad of a spectrum of different opinions on things. But I say that to say that you have to find allies to work with, and you can't just attack things you don't agree with, especially in Georgia, not just because it's a purple state in some ways, but it's still a very conservative state in other ways. And so we, as a professor group, cannot really look beyond that far because we don't have a lot of allies, and we have to make those allies. So that's what I would suggest is if you want to help beyond voting and campaigning, is to work with groups that are for democracy,
Mhm.
whatever political ideology that they espouse.
And I'd like to point out too, for those of you who are here today, is that is something that Secular AZ does a lot behind the scenes. You know, we belong to several coalitions, whether it's LGBTQ, reproductive justice, racial justice, etc. And thankfully, we are able to kind of work more behind the scenes because we do have a Democratic governor. The only thing that keeps us from going down this super dark path the same way that Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Iowa, you name it, is because we have that system of checks and balances. We don't have a super majority anymore, and we did for a very long time.
Mm.
So thankfully, I feel like this year and the year before is the first time that I felt in this position that I've been able to do more things behind the scenes. And it's also helped us to expand our efforts and support school board members. So you brought up something, Dr. Boedy, about, you know, making those connections, supporting those people and making those phone calls. So if and again, this is going to be just a shameless plug for our organization. Something that I do every other week whenever there's a school board meeting, I send an email to encourage those board members to be sane and rational. And then I'll send a follow-up and say either thank you or I'm so disappointed. And I can do that from here. I mean, I have
Right.
pajama bottoms right now, and nobody knows that. You know what I mean? So like,
Well, not so
the,
much.
so engaging is that easy,
Yeah.
and that is what we need at every level of government, whether it's your county board of supervisors, your water authority board, your whatever. We just need to show up and hold them accountable because this machine, like Turning Point USA, they can spread their minions out everywhere.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, that's really important. Is working, contacting lawmakers and not shaming them in public. So contacting them and not just asking for something, but knowing them, especially your local representatives, and not just on the front end talking about the policies you want them to vote for, but on the back end. Thanking them for voting your way, or then also then saying, we're disappointed, but we would love to continue to talk with you. I think that's how it works in a purple state
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it's supposed to work in states that don't have these super majorities. And
Mm-hmm.
that, to me, is what community democracy is about. Is
Mm-hmm.
obviously local level stuff, but also could work further. So the last thing, about Turning Point is I think that they're interested in using the division of politics
Mm-hmm.
and getting their people not just out to vote but enraged and going toward um, Charlie Kirk talks about civil war. I think that that is not just bad for us and bad for the nation, but eventually it will be bad for Turning Point. There may not be a group on the left that is as powerful, and the origin story of Turning Point is that there was, and he started a new one. But eventually, more and more people will see that he isn't successful at changing or expanding the tent, and b I don't think, no, I don't think MAGA voters and Trump people are going to come back to their senses after he's gone, but at the same time maybe they'll go away. And I don't mean necessarily that they should not participate in democracy, but they won't be as enraged or engaged, and take up all the oxygen in the room so that we can work with people who want to be worked with. Obviously they don't want to be worked with.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that's fair. I think a lot of them would say that they don't want compromise. Charlie Kirk is not interested in that,
Yeah.
and to me, that is a sign of a healthy democracy.
Yeah, and even just this week, we had people on Capitol Hill talking about social media, and one of the things that struck me about that is while the youth of our nation are opting into social media, the number of adults who are opting into social media, and it really made me think about how it's like an addiction. They talked about it being an addiction for kids. It's an addiction for adults. And people like Charlie Kirk and others are feeding them clickbait, like they get to scratch that itch. Oh my gosh, there's another Democrat that's making me angry. I know this because Charlie Kirk told me so. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
And
yeah,
I
totally.
hope that I hope that all of us get outside and touch grass a little bit more, go for a walk with your dog or something. Um,
Or talk to your neighbor who needs to vote.
Exactly. So, because our topics are often somewhat depressing, and especially on a Friday afternoon when we're all of us like entering into a weekend where we hope maybe we can just like not pay attention to the climate catastrophe or Christian nationalism for just a hot second. So, like in the work that you do, which is super, super heavy, Dr. Boedy, what is something that gives you hope?
Man, I do obviously teach college students, mainly freshmen and freshman writing courses, and I think that they are interested in things, a variety of things. I think it's not just getting a job or passing the class or getting an A. So I think that interest in stuff, and it really doesn't matter what it is, it's a variety of things, helps people see beyond the tunnel vision of politics. And the other thing is, I just we got an adopted newborn, so I'm going off several hours of sleep. So if there's hope, then I guess it is in that.
Oh, congratulations. How old?
She was born in December, so six
December
months.
what?
16th.
That is my birthday.
Right. I'll look at that.
Shut the front door. Oh my gosh. Okay, now I probably shouldn't have said that on social media. Whatever, it's fine. But that is fantastic. I apologize for not getting any sleep. I am about to also not get any sleep because I will be a grandmother sometime in the middle of March, and I am elated and terrified all at once. But I have already decided that I will spoil that baby, and if it cries, I will just give it cotton candy because I'm the grandma and I can do that. So
Yeah, that'll work.
well, thank you so much. I swear, we had so much engagement on this discussion. I encourage everybody to run right out and buy every single thing that Dr. Boedy has ever published. I can't wait. And again, remind us of the name of the book that's coming out.
Currently, it's titled Seven Mountains. It will be hopefully out in 2025. We've got a couple publishers interested, but that's the title of it right now.
That sounds right up our alley. And again, it's really refreshing. We are not an anti-religion organization. We are a pro-constitution organization. So whenever we have folks who are, people of faith who join us in these discussions, I feel like it's really powerful. And today, this was a really, really powerful discussion that's really important for all of us, especially with Turning Point in our backyard. So thank you so much, Dr. Boedy. I appreciate you.
Yep. All right. Bye bye,
All right.
everyone.
Have a great weekend, everybody.